Today I am demonstrating an add-on I'm making for Unreal and technically Blender as well that translates geometry node groups from Blender to geometry scripting inside of Unreal. Unreal has very recently introduced a dynamic mesh system as well as geometry scripting. So you can technically use nodes to build out meshes in Unreal in real time as well as editing them. Um, the system is pretty, how do I put this nicely? Um, New. It's not very well. It's not. It's how do I put this nicely? It just doesn't have a lot of functionality because it's fairly new. Um, so a lot of the nodes just don't translate. So I am actually making the nodes um, inside of Unreal and then having a translation function call the nodes that I made to do these functions. Uh, and I've tested out the group inputs for like every different type of input. I mean, you've got let's see, geometry is ignored. Float, string, boolean, material, integer, texture, color, object, image, vector. I think there's actually one more. Collection. I don't do collection. Basically, everything that's in here has a direct one-to-one correlation to something in Unreal as far as the variable types. It transfers all the defaults for the inputs, translates all the defaults for the inputs for each node. The mode, like this points and radius, it translates that as well. It connects everything up, and something that's unique to Unreal is an execution pin. Oh, this one was very difficult to do because in Blender, it automatically figures out what nodes it needs to execute in what order. In Unreal, you have to explicitly state what order to put them in. Okay, let's go ahead and delete this because that's the file, that's the resulting file. Okay, so, and yes, I have all these windows open. This is all related to the work I'm doing right now, except for the OBS. Um, so in Blender, I have a script that gives an output in a specific way of the node groups. It goes through each node. You have to specify the node group name up here. But I'm planning on putting this in an add-on so that you can click on like a little drop-down menu to pick the node group. You just, for now, it's just click run script, and it outputs a file in your main Blender file called node group info. And this is what it looks like. It gives the name followed by the type followed by the default value of all of the inputs first. Then it says the next input is a node, then the node type, then the specific node name, which is critical because when you're making connections, you have to know this specific unique name, position of the node, input name, input type for each, and if it's not geometry, it'll have a default value. Like fill caps is a boolean, default value is false. Not necessarily the default value, the value that it's currently at, which is, so that way once you translate it, you'll end up with the same thing that you started with in Blender. So there's one thing in here that I haven't gotten to yet is like it creates the node and see for subtrees in Unreal. I just create them as functions. It's a fairly simple way of doing it. So it creates the function, it creates the node for the function, it connects it all up, but it doesn't do. I haven't got to the part where it actually does the stuff inside the function yet. You'll see this later on. So let's go over to Unreal, and I have save that. So here is my converter. It's just a little widget with a big button, and you specify, where the file is going. For me, it would be characters. Game is always first, so characters, and my file will be the name of the file. Right now, it's hard coded to read from a specific directory. I'll change that so that you can enter it in here. But let's go ahead and just show you what it does, and then we can go through it. Run the editor widget, and convert. That's it. It's done. That's the file. So let's go ahead and edit this file. Alright, so right now this one is empty, so it doesn't do anything yet. So I'm going to connect it up from here to the target mesh. This is a scale mesh modifier because Blender and Unreal don't use the same units. This is not part of the Blender node group. This is specific. I'm adding this specifically because it's Unreal, and Unreal uses units that are 32 times larger or 32 times smaller, whatever. I have to make it bigger. I have to make the mesh bigger. And compile. There it is. So that is the mesh as it would look in Blender if I skipped the group. Curved line, curved mesh. Right now, none of these inputs are exposed, and none of them are set as inputs, so nothing's exposed, so I can't edit it in the game. But let's go ahead and set some of these as let's see, it's at points, so let's set this one promote to variable and make that there. See radius, and let's make that promote to variable and change that. Compile, save. Now let's throw this file, this script created this blueprint. Let's throw it in there. Let's see, scale. Why is scale of, oh, that's a transform, not a, there it is. Radius 10. Look, it's bigger. 15. Look, it's a column. And I don't have the end caps boolean turned on, so it's just a column without anything capped. Let's see, if I turn on fill caps, it actually does nothing because I haven't, because I had to make this node. This node doesn't exist in Unreal. None of these nodes exist in Unreal. How did I get them here? What I did is my translator actually has functions that are defined inside of the blueprint, and it copies the entire function to the new file. So you get the curved circle, curved line, curved mesh, curved mesh, and then it adds these functions to here. The test group is the actual function or the subtree from Blender. How does it do all this? It is complicated. First, it creates the blueprint, which this function does not, it doesn't exist. So I had to write it in C++, which I want to tell you, I am not a coder. How did I write this? With an unbelievable amount of help from ChatGPT. I kid you not. I tried writing this by myself, and I spent about a week trying to create a node, add a node to a blueprint, and couldn't. Just adding a node to a blueprint and like just add a node, any node, to a blueprint. Couldn't do it to save my life. Not in C++. I asked on several forums. No one would give me any information. One person replied, gave me a little bit of information. They're like, here, look at this node and figure it out, or this command and figure it out. Couldn't to save my life. And turns out that function was actually the wrong one anyway. It added a node to the graph, but it had no internal components. So it's literally just a picture of a node. Like you couldn't connect anything to it. It was a completely non-functional node. But to even get to that far, I'd given up. Couldn't add a node to the graph, so I gave up. And I was just watching videos on YouTube, and I'm like, watched one about NVIDIA. NVIDIA put out one about AI, and then I realized, wait a second, ChatGPT can write code. And I've tried it before, and the code is usually wrong, but with its help, I knew enough about coding to where I could work with the ChatGPT to actually get code written. Without it, I couldn't. There's absolutely no way I could have done this without ChatGPT. At the same time, ChatGPT couldn't have done it without someone who knows enough about it to fix its errors. I know coding logic, but I don't know syntax. Like, seriously, I would have never, ever gotten this syntax right. I mean, look at this. F string, colon, printf, open parentheses text, open parentheses, double quotes, then all this, then single quote, ampersand S single quote. Like, I would have never gotten that. If you don't know the syntax, you'll never get the syntax. Like, it took me a little while to understand that the ampersand here makes it an output, but not the return value. Like, the return value is a blueprint, but you also have additional outputs. Oh yeah, it was like, to add a node to the blueprint, you have to create a node spawner. Then you have to know the syntax to actually create the node spawner. But there's different types of node spawners. Like, there's a different one for event nodes, and there's a different one for function nodes, and they do not work across each other. To create a node is all this code. From here to scroll down more, quicker. To here is to create a single node on a blueprint. Like, you have to have the input of the graph, the location, C subclass ugraph node, const class. Like, I would have never gotten that. I would if you don't know that offhand, there's just you can't guess that by accident. Um, so I created one for create blueprint. So this creates the blueprint inside of your inside of Unreal. So it creates inside of Unreal and get base file name blueprint path, which is passed from the widget. Yeah, I would have never gotten this. It just like even if I know the command, like I've never used double colons to execute a function. Like to me that makes no sense. This, like I use dot, like event graph dot get node of class, and it automatically corrects it to dash and then whatever that is, caret by itself. But the colon colon, like I don't understand why there's two different. Oh, I understand now because this is a class and this is an object. Now that makes sense. But why they couldn't just do a dot on a class? Oh, well, I can understand that too because then if you do a dot on a class, it thinks it's a variable. Anyway, add node blueprint, add event node to blueprint, connect pins. I had to do that in C++. And all this I had to just like go back and forth with Unreal, set pin value, read from file, add input output to function. So these are the like the input and output of this function. Like this node right here, mesh and input 7 and return value are all from Blender. Mesh, input 7, output mesh. So I had to read those in because it's a function. It actually goes into these two nodes here. So that took a whole lot of time to figure out because it's not a local variable. It's not a variable at all. Not really. Let's see. This is the copy function graph that I used to copy from the original to the new one for like create circle to mesh. Just a bunch of little stuff here and there that I had to get in there to be able to do it. Oh, and as far as I can tell, Unreal has absolutely no concept of edges. It just doesn't. I had to create a concept for edges, which is the same thing with curve. Like it has no concept of a curve as far as I can tell. So I had to define what an edge is. So what is an edge? Well, an edge isn't really a thing. It's just a collection of points, just 2 points. So I just made it 2 points. And this is even though this is an index, is an int instead of a vertex. This, when I use edges, I actually pull it from whatever, it's like index numbers from some type of mesh that has vertices, or mesh or curve. And what is a curve? A set of edges and a set of vertices. These edges will be 2 indexes from this array of vertices. Let's see what else. So that creates the blueprint. And if it Yeah, I had to put this in here because you try to create a blueprint using this command and the blueprint already exists. It crashes. Then it copies all the functions, like these three functions, to the new graph, connects them. What is this? Extrude edges. Oh, there's a couple nodes that can't be connected because this is not a dynamic mesh like some things where it's like self can't be connected. I think it's extrude edges. Yeah, like I can't connect this pin and compile because this is not a dynamic target is dynamic mesh and I have no self. So what I do is inside of converter I leave it disconnected, and then after I copy the function I connect the pins together. Let's see, go back to the event graph, which is what this is, completed and executed. Then this copies over more graphs, compiles the blueprint. That is critical because otherwise the graphs don't exist until it's compiled. The next thing I do is I read from the text file, which this right now is hard set. I'll eventually create a widget that lets you change what that is. And it reads everything into a string array. Like I very specifically made sure each input is its own line. That way I don't have to do any type of weird like parsing of it. It's just every line is a new element in a string array. That's just how read from. Wait, did I have to do that? Is read file one of my code that I had to write? Give me 1 second. Read file. There, read from file, yeah. F string lines. Huh. Oh, there it is. Load file to string array. Okay, so this command automatically does a new element for each new line character. So that's all done automatically already in Blender or Unreal. That way, I can just compare, because I know exactly what it's going to be or not going to be. And this while loop reads in all the functions, all the nodes, and all the inputs for all the nodes. And it stops when it gets to the links. Like all the links are separated in Blender. Like the individual nodes don't seem to understand the different links. So I wrote that out separately. It actually makes it much easier when you, because all the links are at the end. So for all link in node group dot links, writes them all out. Oh, this is a huge program. So it, temporary variable, var type, then, oh, yeah, first it reads all the inputs for the graph itself and adds those in. That's what this is. So it reads all the variables, sets the default value. Then once that's completed, it goes down to another loop that reads in all the nodes, and based on the type of node, it does this hot freaking mess. So this only understands 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 nodes. 7 different node types. That's all it understands, and it's already this hot mess. Group output and input. So I think I can create a macro for group input. I haven't got to that point yet. And group output is actually not a thing in Unreal. Like, they just, stop. There's no specific node that says, hey, this is the end, except in functions and macros. But the main event graph doesn't have one, so it's just ignored. The reroute node is a not node, K-N-O-T. So I had to keep that in, had to add those in, otherwise you wouldn't have any connections to anything. Then add the different functions, and this is specific to the function node graph, which is a subtree. So it adds the subtree, adds the inputs and outputs to the subtree, compiles it, then adds the node of the function to the event graph. And I have to keep track of a node list for some reason, and I don't even remember why. Oh, this thing is so complicated. But I know I have to have a node list for some reason. And this checks to see if it's links, which means it's no longer reading in nodes. If that happens, it sets the continue loop to false and it exits out of that loop. Or this is a sanity check, which it should never get this point before it hits links. It should always hit links. But this is, hey, you're trying to read from the file that's, you're already at the end. So that's a sanity check built in there. Once it gets done with that hot mess, it